TV Guide has called it one of the best canceled too soon shows in television history, and the Writers Guild of America put it on their list of the best written television series ever made. 30 years ago, when this show stood on the edge of cancellation, so many fans flooded the network with messages that the network itself called it the biggest grassroots campaign it had ever seen for a single show. And it actually worked. The president of the network said publicly that he was ready to bring the show back for a second season. Then it got canceled anyway. This is the story of My So-Called Life, the show that turned a 15-year-old Claire Danes into a star, inspired what's widely considered the first internet campaign to save a television series, and pulled a personal, direct appeal from its creators to the president of ABC, a guy named Bob Iger, who'd go on to run Disney. Understanding how My So-Called Life got canceled starts with a completely different show that got canceled 3 years earlier, because that cancellation is the reason this show got made in the first place. Section 1. Where the show came from. Back in the 1980s, Showtime had approached Marshall Herskovitz about writing a show centered on teenagers, and he'd sketched out something he called Secret/17, a very personal, very internal story about a teenage boy. Showtime passed on it, and the concept sat unused for years. 1991 changed that, when Herskovitz and his producing partner Edward Zwick watched their acclaimed adult drama 30-something come to an end. Searching for their next project, they brought in Winnie Holzman, a writer who'd worked on both 30-something and The Wonder Years, to help brainstorm something new. Holzman's pitch was an uncensored look at what being a teenager actually felt like from the inside, not the glossy, slightly exploitative version shows like Beverly Hills, 90210 were selling at the time, but something that took a teenage girl's internal life seriously as its own subject rather than as a backdrop for drama aimed at adults. A 15-year-old Claire Danes starred as Angela Chase in the pilot, shot in April of 1993, and ABC executives and TV critics loved it almost immediately. What followed was a year and a half of the network sitting on the finished pilot, unable to figure out where exactly it belonged on the schedule. Section 2. An ensemble nobody knew yet. Almost nobody in the cast was famous going in, and that ended up becoming part of the show's whole appeal. Angela Chase carried nearly every episode through an inner monologue voiced by Claire Danes, letting viewers hear exactly what a 15-year-old girl was actually thinking instead of just watching what she did. That structural choice was unusual for a network drama at the time, and it's a huge part of why the show still feels so distinct decades later. Jordan Catalano, Angela's brooding, barely articulate crush, went to Jared Leto, and the role turned him into an overnight teen heartthrob almost the moment the show premiered. Rayanne Graff, Angela's chaotic best friend, went to A.J. Langer, while Devin Gummersall played Brian Krakow, the neighbor quietly in love with Angela the whole time. Ricky Vasquez, played by Wilson Cruz, carried significance that went well beyond the show itself. Ricky stands as one of the first openly gay teenage characters in American network television history, and Cruz became the first openly gay actor to play an openly gay teen character on primetime TV. Playing Ricky, Cruz has said in later interviews, meant giving young viewers and their families permission to see themselves on screen for the first time. That cultural footnote tends to get lost in a story about ratings and time slots, but it's a huge part of why this show still comes up in conversations about television history at all. 15 years old and already a Golden Globe winner, Claire Danes took home Best Actress in a television drama at the 1995 ceremony, young enough that she forgot to thank her own parents in the speech, something she'd bring up years later when she won that same award again for Homeland. Section 3. A Brutal Timeslot. August 25th, 1994 is when My So-Called Life finally premiered, and ABC placed it on Thursdays at 8 p.m., directly opposite NBC's Mad About You and A Rapidly Rising Friends, along with Fox's Martin, Living Single, and New York Undercover. That hour was about as competitive as television got. One of the most stacked time slots on the air. It gave a quiet, internal show about a 15-year-old's inner world almost no realistic chance of winning outright, no matter how good it was. And My So-Called Life wasn't just up against other shows, it was up against an entire era of Thursday night television at its absolute peak. Critics never had that problem, The New York Times praised the show's honesty about adolescence right in its premiere week, and the language critics reached for, uncensored, true to life, was exactly what Holtzman had set out to make in the first place. It's a familiar shape for this kind of story, a show critics fall for almost instantly, airing in a slot where almost nothing could have turned it into a ratings hit. Section 4. The numbers ABC actually cared about. 10 million viewers a week, roughly, is what reports had My So-Called Life averaging by January of 1995. On its own, that's a real, sizable audience. Ted Harbert, ABC's own president of entertainment, said publicly that the number, while high in isolation, didn't come close to what the network expected out of a Thursday time slot. And that same season, ABC's sitcom Home Improvement was pulling in roughly 30 million viewers a week. Next to a number like that, My So-Called Life looked like it was failing, even though it had one of the most devoted, most vocal audiences anywhere on the network. The show wasn't losing viewers, it was losing a comparison it was never going to win. Who those 10 million viewers actually were was part of the problem too. A young, heavily female audience that advertisers in the mid-90s simply weren't chasing as aggressively as the broader, older crowd a show like Home Improvement pulled in. The show wasn't failing to connect, it was connecting with exactly the audience the network hadn't built its ad sales pitch around. Section 5. The first online campaign to save a TV show. Word got out that ABC was considering canceling the show, and its fans didn't just write letters. They organized on AOL message boards under a campaign they called Operation Life Support, in what's widely credited today as the very first internet-driven campaign to save a television series. Well over 100,000 messages flooded into ABC, and the network itself later described it as the most extensive grassroots campaign it had ever seen on behalf of a single show. A genuinely new kind of fan-pressure television network simply hadn't dealt with before. Nobody at ABC had a playbook for it, since nothing like it had happened before. And while television fandom had organized before, it had never done so at this scale or this fast. Using a communication tool the network itself barely understood yet. Mainstream press coverage followed too, with newspapers running stories that treated the whole thing as a novelty, a television network getting lobbied by teenagers over a modem, and that coverage kept the pressure building in ways a normal letter-writing campaign never could have. Looking back, it reads almost like a preview of every online fan campaign that would follow for the next 30 years, from show renewals to casting decisions to entire streaming platforms bringing shows back from the dead. These fans didn't just want the show back, they accidentally invented the modern playbook for wanting it back loudly enough for a network to actually notice. Section 6. The appeal that actually worked. Behind the scenes, Herskovitz and Zwick weren't content to let the fan mail speak for itself, so they went straight to the top and appealed directly to the president of ABC, Bob Iger. Yes, the same Bob Iger who would go on to run Disney for close to 2 decades. Their pitch was simple and direct. Keep this show on the air, they told him, because teenage girls have no voice in our culture, and the show is giving them one. That pitch worked. Bolstered by the fan campaign and the direct appeal, Ted Harbert said publicly that he was prepared to bring My So-Called Life back for a second season, and for a moment, the show everyone assumed was already dead had a real path back. Section 7. The twist nobody expected. Then the show's own star said no. Claire Danes and her parents, according to Herskovitz, approached the producers and told them she didn't want to continue if the show got picked back up. The shooting schedule had been brutal for a teenager who was also supposed to be finishing high school, and continuing on wasn't something she felt she could sustain. Once she realized Danes truly didn't want to keep going, Winnie Holtzman has said, her own enthusiasm for continuing changed too. Since part of what made the show work in the first place was that everyone involved wanted to be there, and once that wasn't true anymore, something essential went with it. A harder theory has surfaced from Holtzman in the years since, that ABC may have already been lukewarm on renewing the show regardless, and that Dane's reluctance simply handed the network a convenient, low-blame way out of a decision it hadn't fully committed to either way. Danes herself, for what it's worth, has said in later interviews that she never felt she had the power to single-handedly cancel a television show, So the truth most likely sits somewhere between all of it. There's a strange rightness in Holzman's own telling to how short the show ended up being. The joy of making it, she said, came from everyone wanting to be there, and once that wasn't true anymore for its lead actress, something essential would have been missing from a second season, regardless of what the network ordered. A show about the messiness of being a teenager, ending in its own kind of adolescence, isn't the worst place for a story like this to land, she's noted. If you're enjoying this one, go ahead and hit the like button, since it genuinely helps more people find videos like this one. And if you're new here, consider subscribing, because there's a lot more where this came from. Section 8. The Official Word and the Real One. May 15, 1995 is when ABC officially canceled My So-Called Life, citing the show's far too narrow appeal, the tidy, PR-safe explanation. A lot more interesting is the messier truth underneath it. A network president who was, at one point, genuinely ready to renew the show, a fan base that had already proven it could organize and show up in numbers the network had never seen before, and a star who, for entirely understandable teenage reasons, chose to walk away first. There weren't really any villains in this story, as one of the show's own cast members put it years later. It was a perfect storm. The show never got a real finale, so its last aired episode simply stops mid-story, with Angela and Jordan's relationship still unresolved and half the show's central questions wide open. Nobody making the show actually expected it to be the end until it suddenly was, which is why no closure was ever built in. Section 9. Cruel Timing. What makes it sting even more is the timing. The WB and UPN, two brand new networks built specifically to chase the teenage audience, My So-Called Life had been fighting for the entire time. Launched within weeks of the show's ABC run coming to an end. The network home this show actually needed simply didn't exist yet, right up until the moment it needed it most, and a few years later, either of those networks would have been the obvious fit for exactly this kind of show. My So-Called Life missed its own window by weeks. Section 10. The Afterlife. April 3rd, 1995, weeks before ABC had even made the cancellation official, is when MTV started airing My So-Called Life reruns, introducing the show to a whole new wave of teenage viewers and helping cement its cult status before the network had finished deciding its fate. That same year brought an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Writing in a Drama Series, on top of Claire Danes' Golden Globe win, and decades later, TV Guide ranked the show the #2 entry ever on its Canceled Too Soon list, while the Writers Guild of America named it one of the 101 best-written television series of all time. An odd footnote belongs here too. A German remake called Mein Leben, and it ran for 6 seasons and 74 episodes. Proof the format had a lot more life left in it than American television ever gave it the chance to show. 2007 is when the complete series finally reached DVD, more than a decade after it went off the air, and it landed on Hulu for streaming in 2021, introducing it to yet another generation of viewers who'd only heard about it secondhand. Every one of those re-releases has sold on the same pitch, 19 episodes that somehow still hold up decades after the network that made them decided they weren't worth continuing. Section 11. Full Circle. 30 years after the cancellation, in 2025, Claire Danes and Winnie Holzman announced they were re-teaming for a new HBO family drama called The Applebaum Curse. Holzman has been careful to call it a completely different story, not a reboot of anything. For a creative team that once got a network president all the way to yes, only to lose the show anyway, the reunion looks a lot like its own kind of second chance. 30 years later, the story finally gets to go somewhere else. This whole story is unusual when you step back and look at it. Most canceled shows get canceled because the numbers simply weren't there, full stop, with no real twist to uncover. My So-Called Life had its numbers questioned, then earned a real second chance anyway, through a fan campaign nobody had ever pulled off before, and an appeal that went straight to the top of the network. Saving a show from the network, it turned out, wasn't the same thing as saving it from everything else going on around it. 19 episodes was all it ever got, and 30 years later, people are still talking about every one of them. Thanks for watching. This is the Throwback Network, and I'll see you in the next one.